It was late October in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, the kind of crisp afternoon when the ridgelines fade into smoky blue layers and the air carries a bite of wood smoke. I'd gone out walking to clear my head after a long week of trying to juggle deadlines, bills, and the constant hum of modern life that doesn't care whether you live in the city or at the edge of the forest. The trail near my cabin is one I know by heart, worn muddy in spots lined with red maple leaves that crunch under your boots. It was supposed to be a quiet walk. Instead, it's where I met him. At first, I thought it was nothing, just the creak of a branch, the groan of wind sliding through hemlocks. But then came a sound I couldn't place. Not a bird call, not the yelp of a fox. Something shorter, sharper, almost like a cough. I stopped. The woods do that to you. If you've spent any real time in them, you know when something doesn't belong. A stillness spread around me, as if the forest itself had paused to listen. That's when I saw him, a black bear cub, no more than 8 months old, wedged under a fallen tree. His fur was thick, glossy, and patches matted in others. One paw was twisted beneath him at an odd angle, and his sides heaved with quick, shallow breaths. His eyes locked on me, wide, suspicious, but also desperate. And then he made a face that I'll never forget. It was half snarl, half grimace. His lip curled just enough to show baby teeth that looked sharper than they had any right to. It wasn't the face of a predator. It was the face of an animal that knew it was cornered and hurt. For a moment, I froze. Every rational thought screamed to walk away. Black bears are common across the United States, and in this part of North Carolina, sightings aren't unusual. Most people know the rule: if you see a cub, assume the mother is close. And no animal defends more fiercely than a black bear mother. But there was no rustle of leaves, no heavy step in the undergrowth. Just him, alone. His small body is trembling. I crouched low, speaking in the soft nonsense people use when they're trying to calm a skittish dog. He didn't buy it. His ears flicked back, and he let out another sound, something between a hiss and a bark. Still, he didn't run. That told me everything. He couldn't. My flannel came off, and I eased closer inch by inch. The cub's nose twitched, nostrils flaring as though weighing the risk. When my hand reached him, he jerked, swiped weakly, and glared at me so humanly that it nearly knocked the wind out of me. If looks could press charges, I'd already be behind bars. But when I wrapped the flannel around his body and lifted, he didn't fight much. His paw dangled awkwardly, and his breathing rattled against my chest. He smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and something wild I can't put into words. I whispered, "It's okay, buddy," though we both knew I had no idea if it was. Carrying him back to the cabin was like holding a live question mark. Every step I took, I wondered if I was making the right choice. The internet is full of opinions, and I'd read enough horror stories. Wild animals can't be tamed. Wild animals shouldn't be raised. Wild animals are dangerous, and all of that is true. Black bears can grow to over 400 pounds, roam miles of territory, and are fiercely independent. A cub might look small now, but in just 2 years, he'd be stronger than me 10 times over. Still, I couldn't just leave him to die under a log. Inside the cabin, I made him a bed in a cardboard box lined with towels. He huddled deep into the corner, his dark eyes following every move I made. Every time I glanced over, he pulled a new expression. 1 minute, a suspicious squint, the next an open-mouthed pant that looked like shock. He had a whole language in his face. I didn't laugh yet, not then. I was too worried. That night, I barely slept. I searched everything I could find about black bear cub rescue. What I found was not encouraging. In most states, keeping a bear cub is illegal without permits, even temporarily. Wildlife officers usually recommend leaving them in the wild or contacting an official rehab center. But here's the problem. Every rehab facility I called was either full or flat out refused. Liability, they said. Too risky, too complicated. One man chuckled and told me, "Hope you've got a lot of Band-Aids." That's when the reality hit me. For better or worse, I was on my own. By dawn, the cub still hadn't touched the food I'd set out. He shifted, whimpered, and pulled another one of those ridiculous faces, a look of pure disgust at the water bowl, like I'd offered him poison instead of plain spring water. I couldn't decide whether to cry or laugh. In that expression, though, I realized something important. He wasn't broken. He was alive enough to have opinions. And opinions, as anyone who's ever lived with an animal knows, are a good sign. Later that morning, I drove him to the nearest vet, willing to at least take a look. The old man, Dr. Carver, met me behind the clinic. He lifted the cub with practiced hands, muttering, "Dumb little thing." His exam was quick but thorough. Diagnosis: sprained paw, mild dehydration, and enough energy to be in trouble. He gave me clear instructions: fluid, soft, food rest. And then he locked eyes with me. He's not a pet. Remember that. He might tolerate you for now, but don't fool yourself, he's wild. That sentence stuck. Wild. The word echoed louder than any diagnosis. Black bears are solitary by nature. They roam alone, forage alone, sleep alone except for mothers raising cubs. Seeing this little one here dependent on me was not normal. And yet, when Dr. Carver handed him back wrapped in the same flannel, the cub turned his head and fixed me with a look so strangely expressive it felt like a decision, as if he was saying, "Fine, you'll do for now." Back at the cabin, I named him Jasper. It just fits soft enough for a cub, sturdy enough for what he might become. Naming him was risky, I knew. Names make things real. Names make you attached. And yet the moment the word left my mouth, he twitched his ear like he'd already accepted it. Over the next few days, I watched Jasper like a hawk. Every move mattered: how often he shifted, whether he drank, whether the paw was healing. But more than anything, I watched his face. He didn't just eat. He scowled at his bowl first. He didn't just nap. He sighed like a grumpy landlord. When he caught sight of himself in the window, he froze, then tilted his head, squinting as if deeply unimpressed with the stranger looking back. It's easy to say animals don't have expressions the way humans do. Scientists will tell you that most are survival signals. Ears pinned back mean stress, wide eyes mean alertness, open mouth can mean cooling off. But with Jasper, it felt like something more. Maybe it was a projection. Maybe just the desperate need to connect with another living being in the middle of nowhere. But every expression he threw at me seemed to carry meaning. And in a way, it taught me the first small lesson of this whole story. Sometimes, connection doesn't come from words, but from presence. From watching, from paying attention. Wild animals aren't blank slates waiting for us to train them. They come with instincts, history, and a language older than ours. The trick isn't to bend them to our lives, it's to learn how to listen when they show us who they already are. That's what I did those first days. I listened to Jasper's faces, his sighs, the way he turned away when he'd had enough. And though it didn't make sense in the logical rule-following part of my brain, it felt like we'd already entered an agreement. I'd watch out for him. He'd tolerate me so long as I understood the terms. And so our strange cohabitation began. A bear cub with a wounded paw, and a man who didn't know better than to take him in. It wasn't the beginning of a pet story, it was something different, something stranger, something harder. Because if the first encounter taught me anything, it's this: when you cross paths with a wild animal who chooses to trust you even for a moment, you don't walk away unchanged. Jasper wasn't mine. Not then, not ever. But he was here in my cabin, and the faces he made, those ridiculous, goofy, human-like faces, were already writing a story neither of us could predict. And that story, as I would soon learn, was only just starting. The morning after Jasper's first night at the cabin, I realized how little I actually knew. It's one thing to carry a black bear cub out of the woods on instinct. It's another to wake up and realize he's now in a box by your fireplace staring at you with the kind of expression that says, "So, what's the plan?" His paw was splintered with strips of cloth I'd wrapped the night before, but his face told a different story. Half suspicion, half entitlement, as if he expected service on demand. I reached for my phone and called the numbers I'd scribbled down the night before: wildlife rehab centers, local sanctuaries, even the state wildlife office. Every call ended the same. Too many cubs already. No space. Too risky. Liability. A black bear cub, even an injured one, was not something they wanted in their care. Some warned me that keeping him even temporarily could mean fines. Others told me to leave him where I found him, let nature take its course. That phrase stuck like a splinter. Nature taking its course sounded noble until you pictured a cub alone hobbling through cold woods slow enough for coyotes starved enough to collapse. I couldn't square that with the Jasper I saw in front of me glaring at my attempt to mash up berries and soften dog kibble into a bowl. By mid-afternoon, I drove him to the one person who didn't hang up Dr. Carver, a gruff local vet known for his blunt honesty. We met behind his clinic after hours. Carver wore gloves. His movements slow but firm. Jasper hissed well, as close to a hiss as a bear cub gets, then pulled another one of his cartoonish faces, a wide-eyed mock horror that made Carver snort despite himself. Diagnosis: sprained paw. Minor dehydration, underweight, but otherwise healthy. Carver showed me how to offer formula in a bottle, how to keep him hydrated, and how to keep his paw immobilized until the joint knits itself back together. But before I could exhale in relief, Carver leaned close. "Listen, Daniel, he's not a pet. Don't confuse tolerance with trust. A bear cub might stick by you for food, but he's wired to be wild. If he heals and you hold on too long, you're not helping him, you're crippling him." Those words were heavier than any splint. I nodded, though my chest tightened with the thought of letting him go. It's strange how quickly responsibility can turn into attachment. In less than 48 hours, Jasper had gone from a cub in trouble to something like a shadow at my side. Still, I knew Carver was right. The law wasn't on my side. In North Carolina, it's illegal to keep a black bear without permit, and the state has good reasons. Bears that grow up around people lose fear, and when they lose fear, conflicts follow: garbage raids, porch intrusions, even attacks. Too many end with relocation or worse. That night, back at the cabin, I fed Jasper his first real meal, a bottle of formula mixed with a bit of ground fruit following Carver's directions. At first, he swatted at it, scrunching his nose in a way that looked like pure disgust. Then, grudgingly, he latched on. As the bottle emptied, his eyelids drooped. He slumped against my arm, face relaxed into what I can only describe as the goofiest expression of contentment I'd ever seen. A mix between a drunk grin and a satisfied sigh. That's when I realized food wasn't just fuel. It was trust. And trust, even temporary, was no small thing. The next week became a rhythm. Feed, rest, clean, repeat. Each day, Jasper tested new expressions on me, as if his face were a canvas he hadn't finished painting. When I clumsily spilled formula, he cocked his head and gave me a look of pure disdain. When I tripped over the woodpile, he raised one eyebrow. How I'll never understand, as if silently judging my coordination. These weren't just quirks. They were survival signals dressed in comedy. Bears communicate constantly with body language ears, forward in curiosity ears, flat in agitation, jaw popping in warning. Jasper exaggerated all of it, turning instinct into theater. In between feedings, I researched obsessively. I learned that black bear cubs stay with their mothers for about 1.5 years. In that time, they learn everything: what to eat, how to climb, when to run, and where to find dean sites. Without that training, most cubs don't survive. I read studies showing black bears roam territories of up to 15 square miles, foraging for nuts, berries, insects, and small animals. Their omnivorous diet isn't just about survival, it shapes the forest itself. By spreading seeds in their scat, they regenerate woodlands, keeping ecosystems healthy. It struck me then Jasper wasn't just an animal in my cabin. He was a thread in a much bigger fabric, a living piece of the Appalachian ecosystem. That perspective brought a small lesson into focus. Compassion without context can be dangerous. Saving Jasper wasn't just about food and bandages. It was about making sure he could someday fulfill his role in the wild, whether that meant roaming ridges or spreading seeds through valleys. I wasn't his savior. At best, I was a placeholder. Still, theory doesn't prepare you for practice. One evening, as I tried to type on my laptop, Jasper climbed onto the desk and shoved his nose against my keyboard, scattering letters across the screen. His face said it all, equal parts mischief and disapproval, as though my work was less important than his company. That small interruption forced me to pause. I hadn't realized how thinly stretched I'd been balancing freelance work with this new responsibility. The cub wasn't just reshaping my routine. He was forcing me to question priorities. Life rarely waits for you to be ready. Responsibilities arrive uninvited, inconvenient, sometimes even illegal. But what you do with them, how you respond in the moment, matters more than whether you had a perfect plan. I thought about the laws again, the warnings, the risks. They weren't wrong. Keeping a wild animal is no small danger, but there's a gray space between rules and reality. Sometimes the right answer on paper doesn't exist in the field. Sometimes all you can do is step in knowing you might have to step back later. Over the next weeks, Jasper's paw healed slowly. His limp faded, replaced with the clumsy, energetic bounds of a cub discovering strength. His expressions grew bolder too. He'd flop dramatically when bored, roll his eyes when I offered the same meal twice, or chirp in mock outrage when denied access to the pantry. The cabin, once quiet, now pulsed with his presence. But even as I laughed at his antics, I couldn't shake Dr. Turr. Carver's warning. Don't fool yourself, he's wild. And that truth lingered like a shadow. For every goofy face Jasper pulled, there was a reminder that one day he might not belong here. One day the forest might call louder than a warm cabin. That duality, joy in the moment, uncertainty in the future, became the core of our days together. And it carried me forward, ready or not, into the next chapter. Because once Jasper's paw healed, the real chaos began. When Jasper's paw finally healed, he wasted no time announcing that rest was officially over. If the first weeks were about careful feeding schedules and quiet recovery, the next phase was a masterclass in chaos. He didn't ease into it, he flipped the switch overnight. One morning, he was curled in his box, half asleep. And by the afternoon, he was staging a full-scale assault on every object in my cabin. The first battle was with the toaster. I'd left it unplugged on the counter, harmless as a brick. Jasper climbed up, sniffed it, and for reasons only he understood, bared his tiny teeth. He growled, pawed the lever, then made a face so exaggerated it looked like he'd seen a ghost. When I laughed, he froze, shot me a glare that said, "Don't you dare mock me," and promptly shoved the toaster off the counter. That became the new routine. Every object in my cabin was a rival, and every rival had to be judged, challenged, and conquered. Laundry day turned into performance art. Jasper would dive headfirst into the pile, then emerge draped in socks, eyes squinting with mock humiliation. If a shirt tangled around his paw, he'd stagger dramatically, fall over, and glare at me like I was the one who dressed him wrong. The sheer comedy of his reactions was impossible to ignore. But beneath the laughter, I started seeing patterns. Black bear cubs in the wild spend much of their time learning through play, climbing trees, chasing siblings, exploring logs. These aren't random games, they're survival rehearsals. Jasper didn't have siblings or a mother to teach him, so he turned my cabin into his playground. Every dramatic flop, every goofy face, every raid on my pantry was his way of building skills, testing limits. What looked like comedy was instinct at work. Still, instinct has a way of colliding with human life. My neighbors, few and far between in these hills, were already cautious about bears. Trash cans or chained feeders are brought in at night. They reminded me often, if that cub sticks around too long, he'll forget how to be wild. And once a bear loses fear of people, it doesn't end well. They weren't wrong. Black bears that grow too comfortable around homes often wind up relocated or killed. Living with Jasper meant walking a tightrope between care and danger, affection and realism. The tightrope showed itself one evening when Jasper discovered the fridge. I'd opened it to grab milk. He bolted across the room, nosed the door wider, and pulled himself halfway inside. By the time I pulled him out, he'd swiped a block of cheese and sat on the floor, chewing triumphantly, eyes rolled back in bliss like he'd won the lottery. It was hilarious, yes, but also a reminder. In the wild, black bears can smell food from over a mile away. A cub who learned the fridge trick now would become an adult bear who thought kitchens were fair game. That wasn't cute. That was dangerous. The small lesson became clear. Every choice I made, what I fed him, how I reacted, what I allowed, was shaping Jasper's future. I wasn't just a caretaker, I was unintentionally his teacher, and that responsibility carried weight heavier than any joke his goofy faces could soften. At the same time, his expressions gave me a perspective I hadn't considered before. People often imagine wild animals as silent, mysterious, and beyond our understanding. But Jasper proved otherwise. He had a whole library of looks mock outrage when denied the pantry sly satisfaction after knocking over books' wide-eyed innocence when caught stealing. These weren't random. They were communicating raw, exaggerated, and honest. It made me wonder how many times in the wild we misinterpret animals because we don't take the time to watch closely. Jasper's chaos didn't stop at appliances. He treated the cabin like his territory, marking favorite spots one by one. The bathroom rug became his nap zone. The windowsill, his lookout tower. The back of the couch, his throne. Each claim came with a ceremony: climb, flop, sigh, dramatically, then glance at me as if declaring, "This is mine now." Black bears in the wild are territorial too, though their claims cover miles of forest. Jasper scaled it down to my 500-square-foot cabin, but the principle was the same. The real surprise came with sound. I'd expected growls or silence, but Jasper communicated in a mix of chirps, snorts, and low grumbles that bordered on comic. Sometimes it was a soft huff when he settled down, other times a goblin-like chuckle when he played. Once after I sneezed, he let out a sound that was unmistakably a scoff, followed by a look of pure judgment. That became his signature, reacting like a grumpy roommate to everything I did. It wasn't just funny, it was instructive. Black bear cubs vocalized to mothers and siblings constantly. Without family, Jasper tested those sounds on me. And when I responded, talking back, laughing, mimicking, he doubled down. It turned into a dialogue neither of us fully understood, but both of us recognized as real. Of course, chaos has a price. My work began to suffer. Try editing a script while a bear cub sprawls across your desk. Pause, tapping random keys, face twisted in mock seriousness, as if critiquing every word. Deadlines slipped, calls were missed, and yet for every frustration there was an equal measure of relief. Jasper's antics forced me out of my head. He reminded me to laugh, to live in the moment, to stop treating every task like a life or death matter. Sometimes the very chaos we resist is the thing we need most. My life before Jasper had been orderly, predictable, controlled. With him, nothing was certain, and that uncertainty became its own kind of freedom. One evening, after he'd spent an hour knocking over stacks of paper, Jasper climbed onto the couch beside me. He didn't demand food or attention. He just curled up, sighed with theatrical weariness, and gave me a sideways glance that felt like a truce. For once, there was no chaos. Just the steady presence of a wild creature choosing to rest in my company. Coexistence isn't about taming or controlling. It's about balance. Giving enough space for wildness while building just enough trust to share a roof for a little while. And that balance, as I would soon discover, was about to be tested even more. Because Jasper's chaos inside the cabin was only the beginning. The seasons outside were shifting, and with them his instincts were growing louder. By the time Jasper had settled into the cabin like he owned a lease, I realized that words weren't our main form of communication. His language was written across his face, his posture, and the rhythm of his sounds. Black bear cubs don't meow, don't bark, don't make the kinds of noises we instinctively understand. But they do communicate constantly. I just had to learn how to listen. The first time I understood this, I wasn't even trying. I was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when Jasper perched on the counter, head tilted. His ears were angled back, not flat in aggression, just halfway like a man raising one eyebrow. His mouth curled slightly, eyes narrowed. I hadn't said a word, but his expression was clear. Really? Another cup of that stuff instead of breakfast? It made me laugh out loud. But when I set down his bowl, he chirped a short, high-pitched sound and tucked into the food as if he'd just finished the conversation himself. That pattern repeated. If I ignored him too long while working, he'd flop on the floor, roll his eyes, yes, roll them, and sigh dramatically. If I pulled out the broom, he'd scrunch his nose and back away, giving me a look of sheer betrayal, as though cleaning was a personal insult. Each face was a sentence, and over time, I learned to read them like subtitles in a movie I hadn't realized I was watching. Scientists say black bears rely on body language more than vocalizations, ear position signals. Mood lip curls can warn of irritation, and jaw popping as a way of telling rivals to back off. Cubs especially use chirps and huffs to keep track of their mothers in the woods. Jasper, lacking that mother, redirected the system toward me, but he exaggerated everything, turning survival cues into comedy sketches. His expressions weren't just instinct, they were improvisation. One afternoon proved just how sharp his communication could be. I was sitting on the porch, head in hands, after a frustrating phone call with a client. Jasper climbed onto the railing and studied me. He didn't make a sound. He just narrowed his eyes, tilted his head, and gave me a slow blink. Then, with exaggerated care, he reached out one paw and tapped my knee. It wasn't random, it was precise, and it was paired with a look that said, "Hey, you're not done. Get up." The tap broke my spiral, and I laughed despite myself. In that moment, I understood that his expressions weren't only about his world, they were also about mine. Connection doesn't always come from what we say. Sometimes it comes from noticing the unspoken signals right in front of us. I'd spent years thinking communication meant clarity, words, explanations. Jasper showed me that presence could be louder than speech. Of course, not every exchange was profound. Some were ridiculous, like the time I opened a bag of chips. The crinkle of the plastic made him whip his head around. His eyes went wide, ears forward, mouth open, in a look of pure scandal, as though I'd committed a crime against the quiet of the cabin. He sat back on his haunches, crossed his front paws, yes, crossed them, and stared until I gave him a piece. That chip disappeared in seconds, followed by an expression that can only be described as smug satisfaction. I couldn't decide if I was being manipulated or educated, maybe both. A fresh perspective came with realizing how much Jasper's antics mirrored wild black bear behavior. In the forests of North Carolina, black bears spend hours investigating logs, sniffing scents, flipping rocks, and testing their environment. Curiosity is survival. For Jasper, my cabin became the forest. The toaster, the broom, the fridge, each was a test, each reaction a performance. His face was how he measured the world and me. But there was another side to it. Each time he pulled a face or made a sound, I responded, laughed, scolded, fed, and reassured. Without knowing it, we were creating a dialogue, and that dialogue blurred lines. Was he learning my language, or was I learning his? Either way, it tied us closer. Experts warn about this kind of bond. Wildlife rehabilitators explain that cubs who imprint too deeply on humans risk losing the instincts needed to survive back in the wild. They may not fear people, which puts them in danger once grown. That knowledge lingered in the back of my mind. Each time Jasper squinted or sighed or mocked my sneeze with his goblin laugh, I wondered, was I helping him grow or pulling him away from what he was meant to be? That question weighed on me most one night during a storm. Thunder rolled through the mountains, shaking the windows. Jasper paced the cabin restless. Then, when lightning cracked overhead, he leapt onto my lap, clumsy, heavy, all claws and fur. His eyes were wide, face tense, ears flat in fear. But when he saw I wasn't moving, he settled slowly and his features softened into calm. That's when I realized communication isn't just about telling, it's about borrowing strength. He was reading my expression as much as I read his. Relationships, even with animals, are never one way. Every look, every sound, every presence shapes both sides. I wasn't just teaching Jasper to trust. He was teaching me to be steady, to notice, to listen with more than my ears. Looking back, I think his faces also pulled me out of my own seriousness. Before Jasper, I lived in a world of deadlines, scripts, and endless tasks. I measured days by productivity, but Jasper measured them by reaction. Was this funny? Was this new? Was this safe? He taught me to pay attention not just to what was urgent, but to what was alive. Communication isn't about control, it's about exchange. And when we stop demanding translation and start noticing presence, we find meaning in places we never thought to look. That truth became clearer as Jasper grew. His expressions didn't fade, they evolved. His squints became subtler, his sighs quieter, his mock outrage more precise. He was maturing, and with that maturity came sharper instincts. But even then, every look carried weight. He wasn't a pet asking for treats. He was a wild cub mapping out a language we both agreed to share. And that language, as I would soon discover, would carry us through seasons of change. Because once the first snow fell, Jasper's faces weren't just funny anymore. They became a mirror of instincts far older and deeper than my cabin walls. The first snow came quietly blanketing the ridges in white overnight. I opened the cabin door to shovel, and Jasper barreled past me before I could stop him. His paws sank deep into the drift, and he froze. The look on his face, wide-eyed horror ears angled forward, was pure slapstick. He tried one step, then another, and immediately spun back, scrambling up the steps with a theatrical groan. When he reached the door, he shook violently, sneezed, and glared at me so pointedly, I dropped the shovel laughing. Winter, in Jasper's opinion, was personal betrayal, but the season didn't care about his protests. Cold rolled in snow piled high, and nights stretched long. For black bears in the wild winter means slowing down. Mothers den with cubs, conserving energy until spring. Males and juveniles may not sleep as deeply, but they still retreat to sheltered spots, relying on fat reserves built in autumn. Jasper, though, wasn't in the wild. He was in my cabin, and that meant new challenges. Feeding him became the first hurdle. Black bear cubs need calorie-dense diets before winter nuts, berries, insects, meat scraps. I tried to mimic that, mixing meals that looked more like survival rations than anything appetizing. Jasper, of course, judged every dish. If the texture didn't please him, he'd sniff once, scrunch his nose, and walk away with a disdainful grunt. If he liked it, he'd devour the bowl, then sprawl belly up with a satisfied smirk. It was a daily negotiation, and most days he won. The second challenge was energy. While wild cubs might slow down in the cold, Jasper seemed determined to fight the season. He'd dash across the cabin, leaping onto furniture, swatting at shadows, pouncing on rugs as if they were prey. His goofy faces punctuated every move, tongue out, mid-leap eyes wide with mock terror or squints of fake concentration. Watching him, I realized that play wasn't wasted energy. For him, it was practice. Bears hone climbing and hunting skills through play, and even in my cramped space, Jasper was rehearsing for a life he might one day live beyond the cabin walls. Still, the season wore on me. Work, piled up deadlines crept closer, and caring for a bear cub while shoveling snow and splitting wood left little time for anything else. One night, exhausted, I dropped into a chair, head in hands. Jasper climbed onto the desk, tapped my shoulder, and gave me that slow blink again. Then he curled on my feet, purring in his strange, uneven way. The message was clear enough. You're not alone. The small lesson was simple. Growth doesn't arrive without weight. Jasper was growing stronger, sharper, funnier. But with every new skill came more responsibility for him and for me. Caregiving isn't just about feeding or sheltering. It's about adjusting to the seasons together, carrying the burden of change without letting it break you. Outside, the forest told its own story. I'd see deer pawing through snow for acorns, fox tracks, weaving between trees, the silent wing prints of owls etched in white. Black bears, wild and free, were hidden away in dens, and mothers curled around cubs. Jasper, by contrast, was here learning testing, stumbling through a season he was supposed to face differently. That contrast nagged at me. Wildlife rehabilitators warn about this gap. A cub raised away from its natural rhythms risks losing the instinct to survive once released. Adaptation in the wild isn't just about strength, it's about timing. When to forage, where to den, how to avoid danger. Jasper's goofy winter antics made me laugh, but they also made me wonder if the day came for him to return to the wild, would he know enough? Or was I teaching him habits that might put him in danger? That question became heavier in early spring. The snow-melted streams swelled, and the woods came alive again. Jasper, now nearly a year old, had grown into his body. His awkward cub form stretched into something sleeker, more muscular. His paw, once sprained and fragile, carried him in bounding sprints across the clearing. And yet his faces hadn't faded. If anything, they sharpened. He'd squint at birds as though critiquing their flight flop on the porch with theatrical sighs, or stare at me during dinner with a look of exaggerated despair until I shared a bite. Watching him grow, I couldn't help comparing him to other stories I'd read. Rehabilitated bear cubs returned to the wild. Some thrived, finding their place in the forest again. Others, too accustomed to people, wandered back to towns, searching for garbage cans instead of berries. Too often those stories ended badly. That parallel haunted me. Every laugh Jasper gave me, every silly look, carried a quiet undertone. Was I preparing him for the life he deserved, or the one he'd be trapped in? Still, there was beauty in those seasons together. Winter nights, by the fire, Jasper curled nearby, snoring softly. Spring mornings on the porch, he was watching the sunrise with a look of curiosity so intense it silenced me. Each moment reminded me that growth isn't just survival, it's discovery. The fresh perspective hit me one evening as Jasper pawed at a branch practicing climbs on a tree just outside the cabin. His face was focused, determined, not goofy for once. And it struck me we often think of challenges as obstacles. But for wild animals, challenges are the teacher. Struggling through snow, searching for scarce food, learning when to fight and when to flee. These are not setbacks. They're the curriculum of survival. Jasper, in his sheltered version of the world, was still finding ways to wrestle with challenge. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. By the end of spring, Jasper had transformed from the injured cub I'd found to a confident, mischievous, almost adolescent bear. He still pulled faces, still critiqued my every move, but he also carried himself differently. More assured, more watchful, more wild. And as proud as I was, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Growth brings choices, and soon Jasper would face his own. By summer, Jasper wasn't a helpless cub anymore. He'd filled out strong shoulders under sleek black fur paws that seemed too big for the narrow space of my cabin. He still pulled faces that cracked me up, but behind those goofy looks was a bear testing boundaries. And no matter how many rugs he claimed or how many chairs he toppled, one truth grew clearer by the day: Jasper was wild at heart. I saw it first in the way he patrolled the cabin. He'd make his rounds every morning, poking his nose at the windows, sniffing the door frame, climbing the back of the couch to peer outside. In the wild, black bears roam miles of territory, checking scent marks, searching for food and keeping watch. Jasper had shrunk that territory down to my four walls, but the instinct was the same. This wasn't just play, it was a ritual, a declaration: this is mine for now. Then came the bird feeder incident. I'd hung a simple feeder near the porch, thinking it would attract finches and chickadees. Jasper noticed it within minutes. He sat beneath it, eyes narrowed, tongue poking out in concentration. Then he climbed. The post shook it until seeds scattered everywhere and dropped to the ground with a look of smug triumph. He didn't eat most of the seeds, he just wanted to test the contraption to see what power it held. That's when I remembered what wildlife officers always say: once a bear learns that human spaces equal food problems follow. For Jasper, this was a game. For a grown black bear in a neighborhood, it could be a death sentence. The tension weighed on me. On one hand, Jasper made the cabin feel alive. His faces, his antics, his mock indignation when I told him no, they were comedy gold. On the other hand, I knew these same behaviors spelled trouble outside. Neighbors had warned me. Bears in trash, bears on porches, bears breaking into garages. Too often the end wasn't relocation, it was removal. Living with Jasper was a constant reminder of that fragile line between affection and danger. Love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's a risk. Every time I laughed at Jasper raiding the pantry or smirked when he treated the fridge like a personal buffet, I was shaping habits that could harm him later. Caregiving meant more than sheltering. It meant protecting him from my own indulgence. Still, he kept teaching me in ways I didn't expect. One afternoon, while I was chopping wood outside, Jasper sprawled on the porch watching. His head tilted, his eyes narrowed, as though grading my technique. Every time I split a log cleanly, he gave a slow blink of approval. When I missed, the look was pure disdain. It hit me then his goofy expressions weren't just entertainment, they were feedback. Bears in the wild watch, learn, and imitate. Jasper was no different. He was studying me as much as I studied him. That realization brought a fresh perspective. We like to think of wild animals as blank slates we project onto, but the truth is sharper. They are observers, interpreters, critics of their environment. Jasper wasn't a passive recipient of care. He was an active participant, shaping his world as much as I was shaping mine. The exchange was mutual. Photography became one of the ways I documented this strange exchange. His faces were too rich not to capture the dramatic sighs, the mock outrage at closed doors, the gleeful grin after a successful climb. Each photo told a story of contradiction, a black bear cub acting like a stand-up comedian inside a human home. But looking back through the lens, I saw something deeper. The camera froze not just his humor, but his wildness. Behind every silly expression was a spark of instinct I couldn't ignore. Ecologists often remind us that black bears are keystone species. By foraging and spreading seeds, they shape forests, encouraging regeneration and balance. Watching Jasper knock over feeders and scatter seeds in my yard, I realized he was still performing that role, just in miniature. Even in a domestic space, his wild spirit was intact, reminding me that you can't erase instinct. You can only redirect it. Of course, not everyone saw the charm. When a neighbor stopped by to drop off mail I'd missed, Jasper gave him the full bouncer treatment. Eyes narrowed, body stiff, a long stare that left the man shifting uncomfortably on the porch. "He's not tame, is he?" the neighbor asked. I shook my head. No, not tame, just choosing to stay. That encounter made me think about human-wildlife conflict in a sharper light. To me, Jasper was family. To others, he was a threat. Both perspectives were true. Coexistence requires compromise, and not everyone will agree on where the line is. My responsibility wasn't only to Jasper, it was to the people who lived in these mountains too. If he wandered to the wrong porch or raided the wrong trash bin, it wouldn't be their fault if fear took over. That truth gnawed at me. Yet for all the tension, Jasper still brought me moments of calm. Nights when he'd stretch across the rug, eyes half shut, face soft with peace. Mornings when he'd sit by the window watching the forest with an expression so curious it silenced every racing thought in my head. He carried the wilderness into my home, not in the form of fear, but of presence. Wilderness doesn't always stay outside. Sometimes it moves and sits on your couch and judges your cooking. And when it does, you realize that wildness isn't chaos to be tamed. It's a mirror showing you how to live less rigidly, more observantly, more alive. By late summer, Jasper had grown into a powerful young bear. His faces were sharper, his antics more strategic, his instincts louder. He wasn't just a cub anymore. He was a wild spirit temporarily inhabiting a domestic space. And with each day, the question loomed larger. What would he choose when the time came, freedom in the woods or this strange life with me? That choice, as I would soon learn, would surprise me more than anything. By autumn, Jasper wasn't the same bear I had carried out of the woods. His awkwardness had stretched into power. His steps were heavy now, his shoulders broad, his eyes sharp. Yet for all the growth he hadn't left, every instinct told me he should have. Wild black bears of his age roam farther, marking territory, searching for food and avoiding humans. But Jasper still returned each evening, still stretched across the rug, still gave me faces that mocked, judged, and sometimes comforted. That contradiction sat in my chest like a riddle. I noticed it clearest one morning when the mist clung low over the Appalachian ridges. I'd stepped onto the porch with coffee, half expecting to see an empty yard. Instead, Jasper was there, pacing the edge of the clearing. He paused, nose lifted, scenting the wind. He looked every bit the wild bear muscles, taut face alert. I thought he was about to vanish into the tree line. Instead, he turned, lumbered back, and flopped on the porch with a theatrical sigh, his eyes cutting to me with a look that said, "Relax." I'm not going anywhere. The truth is, he had options. The forest was open to him. Streams and oaks stretched for miles. Other bears moved through these hills, but Jasper never strayed far. He explored, yes. He tested boundaries. He even disappeared for a day, once leaving me pacing the cabin half sick with worry. When he returned at dusk, his fur damp, his face set in a smirk. I couldn't read. I realized something important staying wasn't about confinement. It was a choice. Experts would argue otherwise. Ecologists will say black bears that grow comfortable near humans often lose fear, and that's dangerous for the bear and the people. They're right. Stories abound of bears raiding trash bins, breaking into sheds, meeting fates they didn't deserve. I wrestled with that knowledge daily. Each time, Jasper sprawled across the porch like a landlord. Inspecting his property, I wondered, was I witnessing loyalty, or was I just delaying the inevitable? The small lesson came slowly. Sometimes love isn't about possession. It's about recognizing autonomy, even when it makes no sense. Jasper wasn't mine. He wasn't tame. He wasn't even predictable. But every day he chose to stay, and every day I had to respect that choice without twisting it into ownership. One evening sharpened that truth. I'd been reading by the fire when Jasper approached, eyes narrowed in his usual skeptical squint. He nudged my arm with his nose, then sprawled at my feet. His breathing slowed steady, the room filled with his uneven purr. Looking down at him, I thought he trusts me. Not because he has to. Not because I control him. But because he wants to. And that's a trust deeper than any leash or fence could ever force. Still, the conservationist in me couldn't ignore the bigger picture. Black bears across the Appalachians face shrinking habitat collisions with cars and hunting pressures. For every Jasper who finds sanctuary, dozens are lost to conflict or loss of land. His presence in my cabin wasn't just a personal gift. It was a reminder of what's at stake. If we want bears like Jasper to keep their place in the wild, we have to protect the spaces they call home. That brought a fresh perspective I hadn't expected. Jasper wasn't just showing me loyalty. He was teaching me about responsibility, not just to him, but to all the wild animals whose survival hinges on human choices. If coexistence was possible here, even for a time, then maybe it could be possible on a larger scale through sanctuaries, wildlife corridors, protected forests. His choice to stay wasn't just about comfort. It was a mirror reflecting the choices we have to make as a society. The neighbors remained cautious. Some asked if I planned to send him to a sanctuary, others if he'd become dangerous. Their fear wasn't wrong. Black bears grow strong, unpredictable. But Jasper's behavior toward them was telling. He never charged. He never begged for food. He simply stared with the kind of intensity that unsettled most people. It wasn't aggression. It was an evaluation. In his eyes, they were either irrelevant or not worth the trouble. That was his way of staying wild, even here. Parallel stories from wildlife rescue came to mind. I'd read about foxes who, after rehabilitation, returned to the wild only to visit the edge of human settlements as if checking in. Wolves that lingered near the people who had raised them before fading back into the forests. Jasper's decision to stay fit into that strange gray zone, neither captive nor entirely free. A liminal space where choice not control defined the bond. Sometimes what matters most isn't the life we think an animal should live, but the one they choose for themselves. Jasper chose presence. He chose routine. He chose to sit on my porch like a judge of the horizon. And my role wasn't to rewrite that choice, but to honor it, even if I couldn't explain it. That didn't mean ignoring the risks. I still kept the cabin secure, the trash locked the food out of reach. I still reminded myself daily that he was wild, not a pet. Respect, not possession, was the boundary line. And every time Jasper pulled another one of his ridiculous faces mocking my cooking, sighing at my clumsy attempts at carpentry, I remembered that boundaries and laughter can coexist. Loyalty is most powerful when it's voluntary. When someone or some creature stays not because they're forced, but because they want to. That kind of loyalty can't be earned through training or bribery. It's a mystery, and maybe that's why it matters so much. By the time the leaves turned red and gold again, Jasper had become part of my daily life in a way I couldn't untangle. Yet I never forgot Dr. Carver's words. He's not a pet, and I knew he never would be. He was a wild bear with a wild spirit, choosing inexplicably to share his days with me. And so, as the season shifted once more, I realized that the real story wasn't about whether I'd kept him or released him. It was about the simple, baffling, beautiful fact that he had stayed. Years have passed since the day I carried Jasper out of the woods. His paw limp, his face twisted in that first defiant snarl. He isn't the tiny black bear cub anymore. His frame has filled out his strength, undeniable. Yet even now, when he sprawls across the porch or peers at me with half-lidded eyes, the goofiest expressions still surface, rolling his gaze as if I'm beneath his standards, sighing when I miss a beat, raising his brows like some forest comedian caught between patience and mockery. It would be easy to say he's entertainment, but that word doesn't do him justice. Jasper became something else entirely. What he taught me was layered, sometimes subtle, sometimes loud. It started with presence. Bears don't rush the way we do. They measure time in meals, naps, shifts in the wind. Watching Jasper watch me taught me that stillness isn't wasted, it's a way of listening. I used to fill every quiet moment with noise, work, screens, endless lists. Jasper filled the silence with looks, with sighs, with his own rhythm. And slowly I learned to do the same. The second lesson came through responsibility. Raising a wild animal, even by accident, means every action carries weight. When I laughed at his fridge raids, I risked teaching him habits that could one day cost him his life. When I reinforced boundaries, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting him from a world that isn't always kind to bears. Black bears across North America face constant threats, shrinking habitat highways, slicing through migration paths, hunting seasons and garbage cans that turn curiosity into conflict. Jasper embodied those challenges. By caring for him, I couldn't ignore them. He turned statistics into a living reminder that every choice matters, whether it's locking trash bins or conserving forests. He also showed me the power of humor in survival. I'll never forget the day he unplugged my modem during a video call, then sat there staring at me with the most exaggerated look of triumph, as if saying, "You're welcome." That guy was boring. In another life, it would have been frustrating. But Jasper's timing was too perfect, too intentional. I laughed until my stomach hurt and the tension of the day dissolved. Humor became his medicine, his bridge. And through him I realized laughter isn't just relief, it's resilience. The knowledge that stayed with me, though, was about choice. Jasper never wore a collar. He was never locked in. The forest was always there. And yet he returned, again and again. He chose to stay. Ecologists might say it was food comfort or safety. Maybe, but I believe it was more. I believe loyalty can't always be explained by instinct alone. Sometimes it's simply recognizing presence. He wasn't mine. He wasn't tame. He was wild, and he still stayed. That kind of loyalty defies neat answers, and that's what makes it matter. One night when the power had gone out and the only light came from the fire, Jasper lay near my feet. Outside, the wind pushed hard against the cabin. I thought about the cub I'd first found injured, alone, too young to survive. I thought about all the warnings, all the doubts, all the laws that said this bond shouldn't exist. And then I looked down at him. His face relaxed, his breathing steady, and felt the mystery of it all. Sometimes the most profound connections aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that insist on happening anyway. Love in any form is risky. Whether it's a wild animal or another person, opening your life means opening yourself to uncertainty. Jasper could have left. He still might. And if he does, I'll let him. But while he's here, every goofy expression, every mock sigh, every stare that makes me laugh or rethink myself is a gift. Companionship doesn't always follow rules. It doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it's a black bear cub growing into an adult, making ridiculous faces in your living room, reminding you daily that wildness and trust can live side by side. And maybe that's the message worth carrying into our lives, our communities, our choices about the natural world. We don't have to tame everything, we just have to respect it, and sometimes, if we're lucky, respect turns into trust. So here's my invitation to you. Think about the Jasper in your life, not necessarily a bear cub, but the wild, unpredictable presence that makes you laugh, that challenges you, that pulls you into the present. It could be a pet, a friend, even a fleeting encounter with the natural world. Ask yourself, are you paying attention? Are you respecting it for what it is, not what you want it to be? And if Jasper's story brought you even one smile, one moment of reflection, I'd love for you to stay connected here. Like this video, subscribe for more stories of wildlife rescue and the strange, beautiful bonds we share with animals. Because in the end, these aren't just animal stories. They're human stories too, the kind that remind us to live with more presence, more humor, more respect for the wild in all of us.